Mr. Bell.
All right, folks, it's 6 o'clock. We'll go ahead and get started so we don't have to be here too long. It does appear that we have a quorum. I'm going to ask that Mr. Lansing takes over the meeting at this point for the purposes of electing officers. And then we'll go down through the agenda.
Thank you,
If I'm
Mr.
still
Chair.
sitting in this seat.
Sure. That sounds fine. The first item on the agenda is the election of the chair. And
Mr.
so-
Lansing, let me stop you. I didn't read that bulletin. Do we need to do that before we elect, since we're officially open?
I'm sorry, Mr.
I
Chair.
didn't read while we're holding this meeting because we're actually Zooming now
Oh,
because they don't have the right tech.
so that actually doesn't need to be read. That's a holdover from the continuity of government ordinance when we were in a state of emergency.
Okay.
So you certainly can read it,
I
but it's
have
not,
no desire to, but I just knew we were Zooming.
yes.
We're not doing it the new way yet. So I didn't know because we were doing the Zoom meeting, we have to do it now. If you say no, go ahead.
Yeah, and even the Zoom or live streaming on YouTube is not a legal necessity. That's just a courtesy for the public. It was a legal necessity when we were in a state of emergency, but at this point, it no longer is.
Continue on. I apologize for the interruption.
No problem at all. So the first item is the election of a chair. Do we have any nominations for chairperson?
I nominate Mr. Brooks as chair.
I'd second that.
Excellent. And are there any other nominations, or is there a motion to close the floor for nominations?
Move to close the floor for nominations.
All right, all in favor of closing the floor for nominations, say aye.
Aye.
Do
All right, we
not-
have,
We don't need a second for the motion?
no, we actually don't.
Okay, just checking.
That's fine. So the sole nominee that we have is Mr. Brooks as chair. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Mr. Brooks is chair. Mr. Brooks, would you like to take the chair back for the election of a chairman?
No, I'm gonna let you continue to do the election of the vice chair, and I'll let you continue through to do the secretary, the clerk, or whatever it is,
That sounds fine. Yeah.
the appointment of the clerk.
Yes, sir.
And then we can go from there.
All right, do we have a nominee for election of a vice chair?
I nominate Mr. Capel.
I second that nomination.
Excellent.
Move to close nominations.
All right, there is a move to close nominations. All in favor of closing nominations, say aye.
Aye.
All right, we have Mr. Capel as our sole nominee for vice chair. All in favor of the election of Mr. Capel as vice chair of the commission, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Mr. Capel is our new vice chair.
I abstain.
All right, let it be noted that Mr. Capel abstained from this election. The final matter is for Mr. Brooks as chair to appoint the secretary.
We appoint Ms. Newman as secretary.
Excellent.
Yes.
Yes.
And there's no need for a vote on that. That's just an action by the chair that takes place per our bylaws.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lansing. You did that so well. I like the way you handled those motions. Must take note. Any adjustments to the agenda? I do have one, but if anyone else has one, let me know.
Yeah, we need to make a modification to the bylaws.
Okay. You want that in new business, right?
Yes.
So 8A is what you're saying? All right.
Do you want me to?
Just hang tight. We know that bylaw changes, it's the next year, that so forth, so forth, so we'll take care of that then. Is there any other adjustments? All right, the only other adjustment we have before A and then 4A will become 4B. I want to do it before the approval of meeting, so I guess it actually would be 4 itself, and then we'll move on, numbers down. want to take a moment to recognize the work of Mr. Hutchinson, former commissioner, and read a proclamation for him in this meeting. So I'm trying to figure out what's the best way to do this. Just make it 3B, I guess. Would it be easy for you if we just made it 3B?
Yeah.
Okay. That way you don't have to change all the numbers.
Mr. Chairman, so under old business, we got a letter from the Wilderness Crossing applicants.
Yes.
Is anyone inclined to discuss that letter at all? I have a couple of minor comments. But
Mr.
is that something that you were going to hit in your report, or?
Just to mention the receipt of it, we have a comment on it, staff does have any comments at this time.
Okay. A couple of comments. Nothing earth shattering.
So if we do it when, excuse me, we do it when, after he makes his comment on it, then we get the commissioner's comments, can you comment yet?
At the commissioner's comments?
Yes, sir.
Or
Or would you like to do?
well, if I just could have, when he brings it up, if I
You
could
can do-
just
that's fine.
ask him some questions and make a couple comments. for the
That's fine.
record.
That's
Yeah,
fine.
if you're okay.
We'll just let that happen, then I can take a moment, we just let it happen.
That's fine.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
If all are accepting that, I solicit a motion to approve the agenda with the,
Move approval of the agenda with the noted changes.
Second?
it's been moved and seconded, we approve the agenda with noted changes. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition, chair votes aye. Approved. All right. First thing I'd like to do is just take a moment of silence as fellow commissioners we work with. Mr. Hutchinson, Planning District 5, former planning commissioner Jim Hudson served Orange County as a member of the Orange County Planning Commission from May 2016 to June 2021. At that time, he led collaborative efforts, including the Rock Through Strategic Visioning Initiative, the Jumeirah Wilderness Areas Plan, the adoption of the code changes to implement those visions. Prior to his local community service, he served in his country in the United States Army before retiring as a full-blood colonel. Jim was most recently a mentor to the new planning commission members in District 4 and 5. He'll be greatly missed. We want to take this time to acknowledge his service to Orange County, acknowledge his service to his country, and to just acknowledge Jim as a fine gentleman. Everybody should have a copy of their December the 2nd minutes. If so, I solicit a motion to approve those.
Make a motion to approve.
Second?
We move the second, we approve the minutes from December 2nd meeting. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. Motion carries unanimously. Mrs. Clerk, is anyone signed up for public comment?
Yes, sir.
Anyone out there want to comment? Open? Closed? We have no public hearing scheduled for the day, is that my recollection? Okay, we have no real work session scheduled for the day, is that my recollection? Before we get into new business, thank the commissioners for entrusting me with the chairmanship one more time. I appreciate that. Thank you for your hard work and dedication to Orange County. Folks don't realize it takes more time than they believe to serve on this commission, to read and be studied up and know what's going on. Jim Crozier told me something in the last 16 months that I think resonates pretty good, and he said that when the planning commission does its job right, it makes the board's job a whole lot easier, which simply means we vet it out right, it makes their job a whole lot easier. So I agree with that. I think when we do a good job, they got an easier job.
You sure that was a compliment from him?
I'm sure. I'm gonna tell you,
You can read that, you can read that
Yeah, you could. I didn't think about that. That's why I like you, Mr. Cooper. Okay. The bylaws, Mr. Yancey, you got bylaw changes you want us to talk to?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Article 4, meetings generally, subsection A, it reads, all meetings shall be held in the boardroom of the RIO Boarding Building located at 112 West Main Street in the town of Orange. We need to modify that to our new facility here.
What's the actual address here? Does anybody know? I know it's Governor Center Drive or something.
It is. With your notice, I'll go ahead and pass down some red line markups of the language proposed. Mr. Yancey in 4A, you'll see the address to call out as the substitution.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I make a motion, we modify the bylaws to be in Article 4. All meetings shall be held in the Public Safety Building, Board Meeting Room located at 11282 Government Center Drive, Orange, Virginia, 22960.
Is there a second? I do have a question, but who can second it then?
Second.
So there's a second for this, but it says all meetings. What about when we meet off-site, like we did for Barbersville, we did for Wilderness Crossing, and so when we use the term all, do we have to put something that's unless otherwise?
Mr. Chair, that is correct. So the preceding section there is unless otherwise announced and advertised, all meetings shall be held.
Where is that at? I didn't read that.
Right in front of the red line strike out, the current language will remain.
Well, thank you, George, because I looked over it 3 times. I'll be quiet, I didn't see it.
No, no.
I did not see that. It's just all, when I heard him read it, it jumped right out of me like we can't do, unless otherwise announced and advertised all meetings. Okay, do we have to say all, or can we just say meetings shall be held?
Mr. Lansing?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I was texting a question to my boss as you had this discussion. Can you catch me up?
So, do you have a copy of what we're looking at?
I do.
So if you look at section Article 4, meetings generally, do we have to have the word all in there, or can we just have meetings shall?
Okay, as in all meetings shall be held in.
Right.
It really doesn't matter. I mean, we can certainly take it out, we can keep it there, but either way, the bylaws, they can be suspended for reasonable purposes if we ever need to hold it somewhere else.
Okay, so it's been moved and properly second that we would approve this. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Chair votes as aye. The bylaws are changed to accommodate. Any old business?
No, not just yet. I do want to mention, we did not 3-hole punch the copies we just handed out for you because you may have made changes on the floor. However, those are with current revision date for today. So if you 3-hole punch those and put those in the bindings that you have with your code sections and any other materials that you have your new bylaws.
Okay. Now, do you have a copy from each side?
Yes, sir, I have it up here.
Okay. I was gonna say, hope it's not this one.
No. No, we have the official copy up here.
Okay, is there anything else to add to that?
No, sir.
No old business.
The frequency of the meetings, is it in here that it's 2 per month or?
Each of those.
Just a personal opinion that, I would prefer, unless we have a business that we have to get into, to just within 1 meeting.
So the commission shall hold regular meetings 6 minutes on the first Thursday of each month and an alternate meeting date at 6 p.m. It's in that same section. So it is typically one meeting unless we got something to do.
Okay.
Mr. Light, you're I can't read this paper. This is difficult for both of us. All right, is there another question about it? All right. Any old business before we go to it? Okay. Mr. Johnson's not here for his report, or whoever the board liaison is. Can you, find out who that is and email that out? That's helpful sometimes when we want to, especially for me, what is the board thinking? You know, this kind of helps me figure out what they're thinking, so just email that. All right, Mr. Leslie, you up for your report?
Sure. Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. In a brief report, I'm going to hand out some material. Pass that down, please. So it's been the custom of the commission and the staff to the commission staff for the commission to prepare a summary of development activity totals, typically with a look back 4 years. So you'll see this is a 4-year look back on activity areas. We're filling in some information as it relates to materials received through December for site plans and subdivisions. There's a little more we may add to this. And then normally that information is presented, again, this kind of summary format to the Board of Supervisors as a piece of information. So that'll go in their informational packet for February. Again, you'll see a mixture of areas with high rates of change, particularly on the building permitting side, and zoning permits that are subsequent to that. That reflects a massive amount of stay-at-home and home improvement that continued from 2020 into 2021, additions, alterations, many of those. Also a lot of new housing starts. A lot of the lots that were on market for years, are not constrained by cash proffers or anything that would otherwise have held them up other than just absorption by the market. So when there was demand, then it was filled. So we had a lot of new housing starts as well. Developments that had been online for a number of years, ramped up. And so we have a number of townhouses that were built. We saw the beginning of Twin Lake Villas, which is the duplexes and the townhouses that are being built off Route 3 across from Jimena Heights. So those numbers are fairly healthy month to month, 5 or 10 townhome starts per month, just filling up in Wilderness Shores, sections 15 and 16, Twin Lakes Villas, Jimena Heights. The Ryan project on Farsi Circle is complete. What is not reflected in here are some of the code amendments, and I know you all remember October pretty well when you voted and sent to the board a zoning text amendment for accessory apartments to be allowed without restriction on size within agricultural and residential districts. And as Commissioner Yancey pointed out at the time, it's not the only consequence, but one consequence is the availability of additional locations for what would generally be called affordable housing. Not affordable housing units, but just other places that could be infilled and built on that were not available for the text change. In the last quarter, from October into January, we have seen a couple of new accessory dwelling units be permitted for accessory apartments that would not have been permitted under the old code. And we would expect that to accelerate in coming years. Orange County will have rules that are more permissive than the surrounding counties, and so it will be a place where people have that housing alternative. So that information is passed out, again, for informational purposes. And we're going to dress it up and change the format a little bit, put it in our new style, and deliver it to the board.
So can I ask a question before you leave there?
Of course.
Hoping this is not obvious and I'm missing this too. So what's the real difference between the zoning permits issued, construction and placement of dwellings, and the occupancy permit? why would it not have an occupancy on a new house? Is that because the house is not finished? Why wouldn't they be equal?
Correct. The occupancy permit, I mean, there are people who take 20 years to build a house. And so, I mean, it happens. But yes, that would be the case. Or, you know, or it spreads a year, you know, that could have been
I
activities.
understand.
Right.
I just want to make sure I'm reading that right, that it's just not, nobody's moved in.
That's right. That's right.
And so what's your professional feel on the swing of this report? What does it say to us? What do you want it to say to us?
Well, we're seeing some activities increase by 54% year to year of the prior year. Again, additions and alterations absorb the majority of that. We've also had manufactured modular homes that have been built that take less time to place on a site. So we've seen some increase in those activities also.
So is there any determination what the square foot cost, average square foot cost to build a home in North Carolina?
I don't have that information. We can, if you're interested in that, we can pull the home builders. We can look through our building permit data. I will share, you know, I mean, it's a sad truth, but the reality of it is people don't always report their building costs accurately or completely. And so if someone says it's a $250,000 addition, it could actually have been a $350,000 addition.
It's only valuable when you sell it. It's no value when you try to do that.
Right. Well,
I
there's,
understand.
well, right, but there's the cost and there's the value, and we aren't necessarily all given accurate costs. You know, the tax assessor is going to catch up with them at some point and say this is what we believe the value to be. But at the time of permit, they just declare the cost, and you know, we don't get their itemized bill all the way through, so we don't know the true cost of construction.
And some costs has gone up.
That's correct.
While the permit was already issued. So
Absolutely.
it would be a fair assessment, I just don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there were people who were making choices to build houses with steel instead of lumber because lumber was too expensive.
Any other questions for anybody? All right.
This is your first meeting in the Public Safety Building in the Board of Supervisors meeting room. I want to add to that, we have some new faces, even though we don't have citizens in the group. We do have the results of some of our recruitment. You've met Kira Davis already. Kira came to one of your meetings in December. We also have Carrie Ragland. So Carrie has joined us from private practice. As you know, Kira from another sister public agency. We won't name them, where we poached her from. And we have, and so that's part of our recruitment. We've added, as you know, we had a retirement last year and reclassification into our management positions. So both building development services, the front end intake, with the retirement of Barbara Crozier, that were internal promotion. We are also replacing our office assistant now. So that division is at a 50% turnover. In the planning services division, you've met planner and senior planner. Eric Bittner, unfortunately, our other new planner, is sick this week and cannot attend. I hope he has a full recovery and will be at your next meeting, but he will not be. He was not going to be here this evening. Recruitment went well this year. It was a challenging time to recruit, quite frankly. People were trying to decide where they put their feet in the world and how long they were going to be there. And we're fortunate to have a relocation. 2 relocations and 1 from the area. So it's, you know, for us, it worked out well. I talked to people in California, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Maryland, I believe. There were quite a few folks from out of the area who had some interest in coming to Orange, but in the end, it worked out best. We had some Virginians.
All right, so go over the names again for me.
I'm sorry. Carrie Ragland is our new senior planner.
Spell it last time.
Ragland, R-A-G-L-A-N-D.
Okay. So I think Miss Davis stood last time and said where she was from and
Correct.
where she lived and what school she came from and all that. And it just seems to me it just would not be fair if we don't do it to,
That's right.
that's right. It seems, you know, it just seems like to me that to keep continuity in government straight. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Very nice to meet you all.
And we're kind of laid back. This is not.
We're old to get here.
Yeah. And this is, we're not trying to put you on the spot, but it's all team working together, so don't feel like it's not an interview.
Thank you, appreciate it. Delighted to be here and meet most of you the first time with Mr. Yancey earlier last week. So my name is Carrie Racklund. I'm basically born and raised in Goochland County, so I'm one of the locals that Josh mentioned. I went to UBC for my undergrad, Goucher College near Baltimore for my master's in historic preservation. My background is a lot of historic site management, but I've been working as a contractor for doing hazard mitigation planning and disaster planning for the past year and a half. This is my first time in local government, and just delighted to be here.
Okay. Thank you. Welcome aboard. If we can help you at any time, let us know. And if you have a question about something we said in a meeting or something we challenged, no commissioner that I know of minds you calling them up and say, what are you talking about? I mean, we just don't. I mean, it makes it easier for all of us, and we'll do likewise. We may call you up and say, where are you trying to tell us?
Thank you. I welcome that. Thank you.
So it's we try to have it as an open atmosphere. Any questions for us? Comments? Told you it's gonna be easy.
Go Bulldog.
Yes, sir.
As a Goochlander, I appreciate that, Mr. Yancey. That was nice.
I've got a good friend in Goochland. He's historic.
So is the drive-in still open in this one?
I don't think it is in the winter, but overall it is, yes. It should be
I've been
probably
there for
in
3
spring.
years and haven't got there yet. All right, Mr. Russ, we keep
All right.
going.
Carrie's leading our planning team. You all in the different districts are beginning to get some communications from the planners that are coming out in a templated form, so that's our kind of standardization. We stood up an inquiries system last year that's a customized system that we built just to be able to handle the tracking and monitoring of work as different people in that team are doing the work. However, I would love to report, and I will report now, that the InterGov system, which is the online applications, submittals, tracking for planning cases, so that's applications for a zoning change or a special use permit, for plans of development, site plans, subdivisions, building permits, inspections, calling for inspections, code enforcement cases, reporting code enforcement cases, using the 311, that's kind of the government help, ombudsman type phone call, is going live. It's scheduled to start in May. I've reported on this before. I'm pleased to report that after about 6 months in development, we have a few months left. We're in the home stretch for internal testing. We're going to be looking to move to external testing. We are on time, we're on budget, in the midst of project manager changeover from our service provider, in the midst of some significant personnel changes in the last 6 months as we've built and configured our system. So Carrie is leading the charge for our interim communications and setting the standard there. We're not going to be tied to any of that because we're going to a new system, but if you see things you like, or if you want to make comments on what you're getting from staff, from planning staff, please direct those to me or to Carrie. Very good. In addition to development activities from last year, I also want to report that we had the zoning text amendment, we also had the subdivision text amendment that was brought forward from the board to the commission, taken back from the commission to the board, and is pending at this point, going back to the board and then to you. We have a flood hazard risk code amendment, which would move the section related to flood hazard risks currently in the code to the zoning ordinance. And I reported on that at your December meeting that was coming. We thought it would be prudent to let you know that there are a couple changes that have been changed in the draft sent to DCR, which is the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, who's delegated authority that works with FEMA on these code and map updates. And we're meeting with FEMA next Monday, thank you. We're meeting with DCR on Monday, I said FEMA, with DCR on Monday staff, to be able to advertise that for a hearing here in front of the commission on March 8th. And we will double, because of the timelines, we will double advertise, which means that we will be advertising for a hearing in front of the commission in March, a hearing in front of the board also in March. So there will not be the normal process that is followed for planning cases that come out of the commission and are reported to the board and they're calendared and they're scheduled for a hearing. So just so you know, this is on a quick track. We were given the updated maps and a call to service at the end of November, and we acted promptly. But that's the timeline that this is on. If you all have questions about that, please contact me. Carrie's leading the communications with DCR, and we have a little bit of a king or ace in the hole in the form of Eric Bittner, our new planner who came from Middletown, where he led the charge for their updates to FEMA and their code in the year and a half that he was with Middletown. So he's just been through all this process, knows the people and the expectations. Okay. We do have a couple rezonings and SUPs that are beginning to percolate and develop. We have an SUP that's been filed, and that's on the pending cases page in Mr. Nance's district. So that's a live case. We have another live case that's about to get applied for in District 2. And then we'll have a couple rezones that are in different districts. So just heads up, there's some cases coming your way as we start to come out of the COVID levels we've been in. I think we'll see more call for in-person community meetings. There was a community meeting over at the old Tally's Feed Store, which is in Unionville, where the rezoning is likely to come through. So those of you who've not in your service to the commission been to many town halls because of the pandemic as much as anything else, if necessary, we will try to make hybrid events possible for people to call in, given the appropriateness for the case that may occur in a larger type facility like a school or a church or a building like this. If it's a smaller case where it's really just not appropriate, then I don't think we would make the effort to have a hybrid meeting. So those are current activities.
Any questions for Josh?
You were going to bring up the.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right, sure.
So also I should say that redistricting is going on, and so there are some district changes that you all should be aware of. I know you are as good citizens, but the maps are available for you online. They're also posted up in our office, and so citizens that come in have a chance to ask some questions about redistricting. Looks like that's coming out in March. There's a deadline in the middle of March for the state. So
And my understanding is that the supervisors will get zoned out, they get to fill this the term, and then they have to. This is a couple of supervisors in the redistricting, not actually going to be in that district.
I believe that is only one district where that applies as I've last seen the maps.
Okay.
But yes, there's nothing preventing an elected representative from sitting in the district even after the district boundaries change.
Which district is?
I'm affected.
You go to one.
I'm more than one.
I thought so. But you were going to one, I think Jim was out of his completely.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I thought you said the board members. Yes,
Well,
yes,
I
one
meant commissioners too.
correct. Yeah, Mr. Yance is the only commissioner.
So you're going to be in District 1? When does that?
March the 1st.
Well, in roughly, right?
March the
And then-
1st,
And then you have your term of
then
service.
you have the cost on the No, everybody finishes up their term and then you change it then.
You can finish out your term.
Then you change it
an
to
option
your
to
term.
resign.
Yeah. But if you resign, they gotta replace you with somebody in that actual district.
Correct. So I did want to mention that, and I didn't want to highlight, where the changes were, because I think kind of know about those. But there are some current members on the board and commission who will be outside of their current districts. As it relates to current cases, the RAZ 2102, which is the Wilderness Crossing case, has delivered in the last month and a half, some material related to amendments to the traffic impact assessment that was performed, analysis, and those have been received by, reviewed by, and commented on by Virginia Department of Transportation by email. We do not have an official word that the amendments have been accepted, and those amendments have not been officially submitted as part of their zoning application yet. They will be, obviously, when they have work from the other acceptable. The second is a letter that was distributed to you. It came from the engineering consultant that I think you all have heard from because he attended the work session. But Mr. Oster, who works for SDI, prepared a letter summarizing what the applicant's intended strategy is to approach gold mines. It has not been proffered, it is not officially part of the case yet, but it is, it's a pretty authoritative letter as it relates to those subjects. So they've been received. There are some notes in there or some directions in there about conditions that could be voluntarily applied through the zoning process. There are also statements about conditions that could be voluntarily applied later in the site development planning stage, and there would be conditions of approval to site plans that wouldn't necessarily flow from the zoning condition. I've not heard from many folks on that letter. It's only been out there for about 2 weeks, I think. Is that right? It is posted to the case page.
Not quite.
Okay, so maybe a week and a half, but as long as we've had it, it's been published online.
Is it online?
It is.
Okay, great. So that was one question I had, is whether that is public at this moment. And I try not to just forward things without checking. So that can be, I can refer people to the Orange webpage.
Yes, it's on the pending cases page. I mean, just as a matter of protocol, if there is sensitive material delivered to the county and it's identified as sensitive material, then it has some protection. But any material that's delivered to the county that's in our possession is essentially a record. So they're not trying to hide their approach, they're trying to state their approach, and that's what they've done there.
So just a couple of comments I just want to air publicly. So I read it pretty carefully. I mean, I feel like they're taking it seriously, which is nice. And so the overall approach seems fairly reasonable. I think there's some details missing that I'd like to see. The only sort of negative critique I would have it is there still seems to be a reluctance to accept that it's likely that the mercury is not, in the dirt. It's actually in the stream. And again, I'm not, maybe this is not a criticism at all, but I feel like they're still not recognizing that. It appears to be a fact. And there was a memo missing from their material that they had at the end of the letter. And this is why I believe this. And I've looked at a lot of the maps, everything they presented, I've studied pretty carefully. And there's a fair deal more documents that we've turned over to the county, and we actually have a pretty good repository. But I just wanted this to only take me a minute, maybe. I just wanted to read this just into the record because I think it's really important. And again, I think they're taking it seriously, which is really good. So this was, the State Water Control Board visited the site in 1988. And they have this document, by the way. As a matter of fact, I spoke with Mr. Oster about it. It's partly why I was a little surprised not to see the reference to it. They kind of indicated in the letter that there hadn't been any activity, to speak of for 80 years. That's not exactly correct because this site visit was done in 1988. And it was done by a gentleman named Mike Shalor, who worked for the State Water Control Board. And this was his memorandum for the record. And again, the county has this, so I'm not, as a matter of fact, I've written this in the email, but I felt felt it important just to read this real quick. So he visited the site with some other folks, and this is what he wrote. And by the way, he also did a study, which I'm trying to track down. So there's more to it than this. So these are his words again. The tailings from gold mining processes were deposited in a 60-foot deep pit located in the stream bed of the current X Trip, which is an unnamed tributary. The pit has completely silted in over the years and now appears as a very shallow 1 to 2 foot deep beaver pond. So the language in there that they're going to keep the runoff from being in contact with the mercury, that I'm not sure that's a very viable strategy. It's probably occurring right now. And then he's got a lot more data in here, but the other thing I want to read, I want to remind the commission that the amalgamation process, why they use mercury, was the mercury bonds with gold, right? It basically coats the gold and makes the gold heavier so that it'll settle out. And they can collect it, particularly from, and I've learned a lot since I last read this, but basically they crush this rock into almost a fine powder like flour. And they put it in a sort of centrifuge, not really quite a centrifuge, but a pot that has the water rotating, and they put what they call quicksilver, which anytime you see quicksilver, that's mercury. So this is now the same guy, Mr. Shalor, who is, I believe, 100 meters downstream from this beaver pond, and he's witnessing Mr. Runyon doing his sluice. And so remember, quicksilver is silver and it coats gold. So again, this is his writing, and this is why I think it's important that they recognize that there's likely contamination in the streams. So he's witnessing this Mr. Runyon do this sluicing, so to speak. And so he writes, I actually saw no globules of mercury in any of the areas we looked at. I did see flecks of gold during Mr. Runyon's panning process, and the particles would appear to vanish as they were coated by the mercury, at which point I couldn't distinguish them from the rest of the substrate. So the man's exposing gold out of the sediment, and there's so much mercury around the sediment that it's immediately coated by the mercury and appears to vanish as it changes from gold into the color of the rock. He also showed us some larger nuggets that had been collected earlier that were covered with a dull silver or solder-like coating. So those are nuggets that he collected that the mercury had apparently amalgamated to. So that's all. I just wanted to read that in the record. I want to let everyone know that this document is available. The county has it. It's a gentleman that worked for the State Water Control Board who actually visited the site in 1988. So again, I just feel like they're kind of stepping around that issue. It may be a liability. I mean, I don't know what's going on, but I think it's important for the county that we make sure that whatever needs to be done with that stream that is done. And again, I want to compliment the applicants. I know they're not here, but they'll probably watch this video. That I do feel like they're taking the issue seriously, and that was good to see. So that's all I have. Thank you.
So, Mr. Chair and members, I would just add to that. So we have the TIA amendments that have come in. We have the letter that's come in. So those have been received as basically informational pieces. What is missing is proper conditions that have not been added to the case. And so you don't have a report on that. You don't have.
So one more question, Mr. Chairman. Please.
Yes, sir.
So when they say in their letter that they commit to, for instance, not building roads or homes over the horizontal shafts and drifts, so that's not enough, right? We would need to incorporate that. If we agreed on it, that would need to be incorporated as a condition.
Correct. Just to be clear, and this is a little picky, but it's not that picky. We have a letter received from a consultant on the subject. That letter does not commit anybody to anything.
Okay.
Because it is not a proper condition, or it's not from the agent for the applicant. It's an informative letter.
Okay.
And and that's what I said, he is suggesting certain actions, either as zoning conditions that could be made, or as conditions on site plans that could be made later. Yeah, I mean, it's recommendations, I believe, for conditions, so they have some bearing, but they don't have weight of law as a proposed condition at this point.
Just to make sure I understand that if they were to commit this in their application, similar language, or they proffer that to say, we're going to either do or not do it, or whatever they say in the finalized application that comes forward. When they do that, their current development plan would, at least as it's shown with streets and lots, would likely change as well. That's how I'm reading this, that as they've submitted, well, the information they submitted in their incomplete application would change based on this, if in fact they hold true to this. Is that the way you're reading it?
Correct. Mr. Oster's letter includes an overlay that shows some of the areas that could have some potential change to their
Correct.
to their
Okay.
plan.
So we have to allow them to go through the process and then provide the full application. So, okay, great, thank you.
Is there any more questions?
Mr. Chairman, I have questions on a completely unrelated subject.
All right, hang tight, let's see if Josh finished.
I am done, sir.
Okay.
Okay, so question as far as the Tracy's might be and not a complaint. I just want to understand how we're going to operate moving forward. So are we not going to have any printouts here when we show up?
That is completely up to you.
Okay. I operate in a certain way based on the way we're set up. If the materials aren't here the way I expect them, then my whole plan goes to crud. So
Tracy called me prior to the meetings, and I will tell you whether they have them prepared.
so what do we, can we
So
talk?
let's go ahead and continue doing what we're doing. And in the future, if we decide we want to change it, we will do that. But let's make this meeting look like they did at the previous recording building. And then we'll move on from that. I'm with Jason on that. I kind of write all over mine. That's why I said if you hand me something you want me to sign, don't, because I'll make a little cursory notes here. So I'm just saying that we're not going to change anything other than location. Is that what you want to hear, Jason?
I'm neutral, like whatever.
Is that okay with you? You the clerk.
I want to do whatever is convenient for all of you all.
So let's continue to do what we're doing. And if we need to change it or want to change it, then we will tell you at that time. I think it's good till we get acclimated to this setting and environment and what have you. Because I think one thing I want to ask the board, have they looked at that speaker's table, let's go back some. It seems like I can't see the person. And when she came up, I was trying to use her as an example. Kind of want it back a little bit. Do y'all feel that? That you just, like I'm peeping now.
I don't have that problem, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, for us weight, height challenged people. But so, so until we get the acclimation of the building, what we're doing and how we're doing it. And what made these go off? They're just,
Evidently inactivity.
and we have
I
no way
don't
to
know how
turn
to,
back.
I've already just asked them how to live with that in the
Okay.
future, so.
Okay.
Well, if I may, one suggestion that I think, because, my end goal would be to not have paper. I mean, if it were left to me, but I know not everyone's, I'm the guy that also did want another tablet either, or another laptop, because I just have enough. But I think like as we're presenting, like for instance, when we were doing the minutes, if it's possible, like if they were pulled up here, we'd be able to kind of, because I read everything before I come here. I make notes, based on the line numbers on some of the documents, things that are complicated.
There we go.
I might highlight it and print it. And then I just like to kind of have a last look before we do the vote. So maybe that might be a way to start avoiding paper, as the meeting's moving, the documents are being pulled up right here. I mean, just a suggestion, but.
Okay. Mr. Lansing?
Mr. Chair, just when we get to a good transitional point, there's something I'll need to bring up.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good idea too, because like today, when we're looking for that wording, somebody with a cursor could have said right here. Which would have helped us all when we're trying to figure out what's going on until we got it. Anything else?
No, sir. Thank you.
Mr. Langston?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I apologize, I just noticed something just came to my attention that we'll need to go back to a previous agenda item, the new one that was added, which I believe is 3A,
Okay.
the adoption of this bylaws amendment. We have a requirement in our bylaws that requires 30-day notice, and this can be waived. And while the other commissions that we have here in Orange County, waiver takes place automatically just by no one objecting and being present. But in our case, we actually have to affirmatively act in order to waive it. So what I would recommend to the commission is that we go back to item 3A, which we reopen that. We take a vote to waive it. It has to be approved by a 4/5 majority vote, so we need to do that by roll call. And then we'll need to vote again to adopt the bylaws amendment.
So we're waiving the 30-day notification.
That's right.
And to be clear, all we're doing is changing the address location of where the meeting's held. So just for the public. We want to waive it stuff.
Okay. I solicit a motion to waive that portion of the bylaw so that we can go back and adopt the actual bylaw change.
I make a motion that we make that waiver as reported by Mr. Lansing.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved in second that we would waive the bylaws, waive that portion of the bylaws and adopt the new wording of our meeting place.
And now we can
No,
go
we-
roll vote.
I'm
I
sorry.
got that roll call vote when she's talking.
So just to make sure I understand, this portion before we go back and then approve the bylaws to make it actually official, we're waiving the 30-day notice
No.
requirement. I seconded that motion. And so we're gonna vote now by roll call on that.
On the bylaw, on the
Yeah, the
bylaw
bylaw
waiver.
waiver. Yes, sir.
Then do we have to re-vote again on the actual?
Yes.
Yes.
No, we vote again on the actual bylaw. So we will call for roll call.
Mr. Capella?
Aye.
Mr. Yancey?
Aye.
Mr. Brooks?
Aye.
Ms. Zelmaker?
Aye.
And Mr. Nichol?
Aye.
So it appears the passes unanimously. Now solicit a motion to change the meeting place, not time, meeting place from the Gordon Building to this facility here.
I make a motion, Mr. Chairman, that we modify the bylaws to effect changing the address and location of our meetings to the public safety building located here.
Is there a second?
I'll second that.
It's been moved and second that we change the meeting location. Do we need a roll call or do we?
For this one, we don't need a roll call.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, chair votes aye, motion passed. Thank you so much for your catch.
See how important he is to us?
Yes, sir, we do, we do.
Can't even operate without him.
That's right. We're not
you for saying
gonna
in front of my
sit in my
boss.
home with you. Commissioner comments, Mr. Nichol, we'll start with you, we'll work this way and we'll see what happens.
Thank you for, Mr. Chairman. Well, first of all, congratulations.
Thank you, sir.
To both you and Mr. Bell, for your service, and thank you for doing that. I do, appreciate the commission, as the District 5 representative, that took over from Mr. Hutchison. I want to just say thank you for that acknowledgement, the moment of silence. He spent, a number of hours with me transitioning, and I was very grateful for not only his knowledge, but his thorough commitment to walk me through the process. And I will tell you, he has not only served this commission well, served in Lake of the Woods in District 5. His public service was a great benefit to the county, and I'm personally grateful for what he did. I'll certainly miss him, and I think as we all saw, there is a in Lake of the Woods Clubhouse memorial on February 26th at 2 p.m. So appreciate Tracy sending that out, and certainly look to honor his service to the Lake of the Woods and to Orange County. And I just want to express that publicly as the representative who took over for Mr. Hutchison. Thank you.
There's no much,
I
I'm
don't
sorry.
know. Any additional comment?
I don't have any additional comments either. Mr. Yancey?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to sort of add to Mr. Gillespie's comment. In District 2, forthcoming are a couple of things, the Tally Feed Store, one in the village of Unionville. And I think Donald and myself, and maybe Jason was here when David Nicholson bought that. Unfortunately, David passed away, and now someone else is trying to purchase it for a different purpose, and therefore wants to amend the proffer. So that's one item coming. The second one is a very unique, and Carrie and Josh and I met with the applicant. I tried to get from them cliff notes, but the applicant's application is only 151 pages. So you'll have some good reading. It's for a small 1 megawatt solar facility, less than almost 10 acres.
Correct.
In size, very unique, very innovative concept of being able to do this. And it will only actually serve, if my memory, 88 customers in Orange County that will get the electricity and will not go outside of the county.
What's the new verbiage for solar farms now? I use the term solar farms, someone don't know, they were now called
Solar plants.
Well, it's a solar energy generating field. You can call it a solar field. It's a solar energy array. You want to refer to that.
Okay.
Okay.
But not farm.
Not far, but
Well, and that's what I got corrected on, and I was along the way, because I'm doing it, calling solar farms for, since we were here, so I was trying to figure out what I'm saying wrong.
You must have offended someone, Mr. Brooks, and
I
so
did.
so they canceled that word.
the last item is quite unique. It's a family subdivision of an individual that wants to subdivide it again, and therefore there are multiple dwellings, and therefore there's a private driveway that will not comply. And so therefore it has some topography issues as far as needing fill dirt. And it's just a sort of an array of things, and that's going to be forthcoming as well.
You have everything be going on.
I don't know how I got lucky this time.
Don't work with Josh and hire some people. And everything going on here. Mr. Capel?
No, I don't have anything, just one thing, one minor thing, and that is, I am once again a football fan.
I bet you are.
Cincinnati Bengals are
Yes, you
going to
are.
Yes.
I actually watched, for the first time in many years, I actually watched a football game. So,
Well, finally you had something to watch.
I'll second that, as a native Buckeye, and had spent my first, 20 years and 15 of the first 20 years in Cincinnati. So 31 years ago, when they did go to the playoffs, I was in Indianapolis and drove over when my dad said I scored some tickets. So it's been a long dry spell. So
Becomes the last football game I watched. It's like 30 years ago.
Ladies and gentlemen, is there anything else that calls our attention?
Move adjournment?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed?